Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ian Lawless, Procurement Leaders Content and Conference Director. Delighted to be with you all today to discuss the findings from Procurement Leaders 2023 CPO Compass report. I'm delighted today to be joined by Nick Heath, Principal Analyst at Procurement Leaders, and Mudit Kumar, Vice President of Consulting at GEP, who partnered with us on this report. Just quickly to introduce you to, gents, just a quick word about yourself, if you wouldn't mind, and your roles at your respective companies. Mudit, I'll come to you first. Welcome today.
Thank you, Ian. Very nice to meet the entire audience. Mudit Kumar, Vice President with GEP, been with the firm for 8 years, been in procurement and supply chain for 20 plus years. And I can say these are very exciting times and looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. And Nick, welcome.
Yeah, hi everybody. Nick Heath. I'm Principal Analyst here at Procurement Leaders. I've been with the company since May this year. My background is journalism. I spent about 2 decades working in journalism in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, and turning attention to what the very interesting world of supply chains and procurement. Very much looking forward to chatting with folks today and hearing more of your thoughts on the current situation as we find it.
Thank you both very much. Well, more from a great panel in due course. So just a couple of bits of housekeeping and to set the scene really from me today. This is an interactive webinar just to begin with, of course. Some of you have already put your questions in to our panel in advance, so extra gold stars for those of you that have done that today. But anybody that wants to put more questions in throughout the course of this webinar, please do exactly that into the Q&A section, and we'll do our best to answer those as we go and throughout the course of the webinar as well. You can submit for any additional resources as well. They're available throughout the webinar, and to be able to find the link also to this particular report. For those who are members of Procurement Leaders, you'll be able to find that link down there to access on our member site. Feedback, please do provide it. Always helps us in ensuring that these webinars are a great product for our global community. And any technical difficulties, I hope there aren't any for anybody today, then please do drop a note into the question box and the team will be able to support. Just to set the scene, what we're going to be covering today, and a bit of context on the report itself. I mean, the CPO Compass report really is, from our perspective, aims to deliver leaders some insights that help them navigate the challenges for the upcoming year. So in this instance, 2023, and giving them those insights and actions for them, so those CPOs and their teams, as to how they can best, in this instance, embed resilience, deliver enhanced capabilities, and drive their organizational sustainability efforts. And it's all very much powered, and the insights have come from Procurement Leaders as the most valued procurement network. So this report is based on a survey of CPOs or their equivalents conducted in August 2022. The survey received well over 100 or so responses from different individual organizations, a variety of different industries and geographies, all of which is greatly detailed by Nick and the team in the report itself, and the survey findings supplemented by interviews with CPOs and procurement leaders, advisors, and desktop research also. The 3 areas that we're going to cover today, I think, that are really fascinating, are centre around building future-fit supply networks, upgrading procurement capabilities, and then thirdly, mapping the course to net zero. So an awful lot to cover, Nick, for us in the next 40 minutes or so. So why don't we crack on straight into it with the first topic, which is a look at building future fit supply networks. I'll hand over to you, sir.
Great, Ian. Thanks very much. Afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be here. I wanted, just before we get going today, we might just briefly dial the clock back to see where we've come. Those of you who were here on this call last year and the launch of Compass-like report last year may recall that as we went to press, most procurement teams were focusing on the path out of the pandemic. After a tough 2 years, our report last year predicted a bumpy and blurry 2022 lay ahead. Inflation, a growing concern, issues such as labour shortages, logistical bottlenecks, hopes generally, I think it's fair to say, were for a return towards less challenging times. Now, as 4 things have panned out, I think it was less than a month after the publication of last year's report that tanks and troops built up on the border of Ukraine, the precursor to Moscow's February invasion. And we know what happened next, the trigger for disrupted commodity flows, blocked supply channels and sanctions. Inflation, which many anticipated would be driven by a combination of pent-up demand, running up against lags in supply, has been turbocharged by that conflict. Now, of course, everyone here is familiar with those events. The reason I wanted to touch on them is that it underscores in some ways, like the breakout of COVID in 2020, how quickly and fundamentally conditions can change and threaten supply chains operations. The war in Europe is a significant addition to the list of developments over the last 3 years that exposed what we now see as vulnerabilities of globalization and supply chains to geopolitical tensions. We see macroeconomics, pandemic lockdowns, protectionism, climate change, and more. The headlines that we've seen this year, plenty of them, that's a mere snapshot of the issues that we've seen affecting supply chains and procurement through 2020. I don't think a week has gone past when we haven't seen headlines like these across our newspapers and online media. Unfortunately, as we're heading towards 2023, it appears that many of those challenges are developing deeper roots. I was saying this morning, the timely news that the Collins Dictionary has announced that its word of the year for 2022 is permacrisis. They describe that as an extended period of instability and security. I think a lot of people probably identify with the word permacrisis. Indeed, you may well add it to your lexicon for the months and year to come. If we are indeed in this period of permacrisis, the nature of the resilience, I guess the firefighting, for want of a better word, that got through the companies through the pandemic needs an overhaul. It's not a design, that kind of resilience, for withstanding a protracted period of disruption people and teams if nothing else is too great. So entering 2023, it's becoming increasingly clear that resilience for the long haul needs to be at the core of every aspect of procurement functions design, increasing the capability to withstand more diverse, longer, and enduring lists of challenges. So with that in mind, let's take a look at what firms are doing to help build that capacity, and we'll run through the findings from the report. As you can see there, 43% of CPOs said that their organisation has already started to make permanent changes to its supply chain. You've all seen throughout the year terms such as friendshoring, nearshoring appear more frequently in the media, gaining currency. We've seen reports of senior executives saying, for example, that globalisation is dead. It's time to bring things home. For this year's report, we were keen to try and get a clear idea of what firms are doing with regards to their supply chains to bolster their defence against disruption to their operations. That gives you more of an idea of what we got. So when we polled folks, those are our 5 options. As you can see, 42.5% told us that they've already started making changes in response to geopolitical issues such as the war in Ukraine, the pandemic, lockdowns, other geopolitical issues. And to give you an example, some of those responses that we got, what people were doing, nearshoring is indeed mentioned. Some mentioned increasing regionalisation. Some changes were energy related. More people said they were dual sourcing, increasing supply base, reviewing logistics providers, second source supplier, and so on. So the overall picture does suggest that many firms are responding to volatility disruption by taking some permanent steps to insulate themselves in supply. Although they're being cost efficient, long supply chains may be looking less attractive to those businesses with increasingly low risk appetites. For those who are maintaining their risky supply chains, a number of CPOs have stressed to us that even if they are continuing to function efficiently today, the events of the last 12 months have taught us that they might not tomorrow. So they've highlighted the importance of how necessary it is these days now for functions to have good, deep scenario planning. And in fact, one CPO told us procurement needs to switch from being reactive to proactive, constantly reviewing supply chains and suppliers for any stress points, and allying that with a tested mitigation plan in place to execute if and when the time comes. At this point, Mudit, would you like to come in on anything you'd like to add on that front?
Sorry, talking on mute. So I think all of these trends make a lot of sense. I think these are very fundamental shifts in supply chains. And I think we are clearly seeing that the companies aren't just thinking about making these changes. I think we are clearly seeing a shift from what has typically been just-in-time supply chains to now just-in-case supply chains. And there is a clear recognition that this is crucial for businesses, crucial for them to continue to evolve. And it's not something that is only thought in terms of cost savings, efficiencies. That has been the traditional lens of how businesses, enterprises look at supply chain. How can I reduce operation cost? I think now the realization is that these operations, supply chains are integral to business, integral to delivering earnings per share back to stakeholders and shareholders. And that has fully settled into a lot of companies out there. So I think it's a very important paradigm shift, Nick, as you rightly pointed out, and we'll continue to see like what it really means as we progress further in discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that brings us on to the issue of inventory management. This is another thing that we were keen to look at, is how firms are tackling, or are they changing their approach to inventory? We call it here saying, is this the end for just in time? In which 75%, sorry, I rolled on a bit too quickly there. And no, it won't roll back. Oh, it will roll back. I've got a lag here, folks. Sorry, I'm just going. No, where has it gone? I'm not getting able to shift these slides. Ian, are you able to shift these slides?
Yeah, I'll bring you on to the inventory management slide now, if that's one you won't need.
If you could.
That's up on our screen now.
Okay. I think I'm having internet issues. I can't see those. So, Moody, maybe take us through inventory management, because obviously there has been this debate about just in case versus just in time. We've polled on it. We've polled, obviously, looking at 2023 versus 2022, what people are expected to do next year versus this year. But we also wanted to look at what people are doing next year compared to pre-pandemic, because obviously the expectation is that people have been building inventory this year in anticipation that more shortages could come through and hamper operations.
Yep. No, I think it's a very good point, and I think what I'm perceiving across some of the large global companies that we work with, everybody is trying to find the new equilibrium going forward. I think it's a very clear shift, just in time to just in case, like what does it mean? But I think we are also seeing some more macroeconomics play here, very dynamic. I think all of us, I think we have even kind of audience kind of recognizing that there's a lot of talk about recessionary scenarios in 23. We have already seen some of the weakening prices in spot markets, both for inland freight as well as ocean freight. We have also noticed some reductions in shipments going from east to west. And any of us who are like tracking news cycles, we have seen like many large retailers, especially, being caught like on the wrong foot when they had too much inventory on the books and they weren't able to move it very effectively. We have recently seen a marquee like outdoor apparel manufacturers which fell into red recently from profitability side and extremely high inventory as well. So what I think what we are seeing is inventory is a very important concept. Folks are not just looking to cut it, but they're still trying to optimize it. That finds the right balance between not having too less, but also having the right product at the right time, at the right location. And that I think is still work in progress. I don't think we have cracked that equation quite yet. And the dynamism of what the market look like and how consumption demand is going to be in the economy next year, those are some of the variables that I think we'll continue to have to watch out for. But a clear shift in thinking in inventory. It's not just about how do we cut it more, it's more holistic. It's more about how do we optimize it for the business. Back to you, Nick.
Obviously, something we've been hearing a lot this year coming through from colleagues and members is that the cost of of not having the item on the shelf is too great, isn't it? I mean, I think and we can quantify that in, say, financial terms or market share or reputational terms, not having goods on the shelf or availability of a vital product in certain sectors that customers rely on is too great for firms to counter, isn't it? So, I mean, how much do you think that is shaping that concern about the opportunity cost or financial cost is shaping people's approach to inventory at this point as we're leaving?
Yeah, I think that is a very good point. I think it eventually it's a trade-off between preventing stockouts by having some inventory and the financial cost of tying up our working capital with inventory. I think that's the trade-off companies have been making. I think the other factor that to think about is the rising cost of capital across the board. I think we all know what is happening in the US, and then the most and same kind of trends with central bankers in most other countries as well. But across the globe, there has been a constant upward trend in the interest rate. So there is a constant increase in cost of capital. So there is a cost attached to holding inventory, which is rising. But there is also a cost of not having enough inventory. So I think that's what I'm saying. It's a fine balancing act. I think companies are looking at not just kind of bare bones inventory and assuming everything will work right, because it didn't work in the last 2-3 years. So there is a clear shift to building the inventory, but also a recognition that we still have to optimize it and find the right balance with the new macroeconomic environment we are in and we will be in 23.
Yeah, great.
Thank you both. I think we're going to come to a natural point within this kind of first section here, and just some action points, I suppose, that we want to share with everybody, just as some takeaways, so much as anything else for implementation, kind of in the short, medium, and longer term as well. These might be easy, quick wins to read, but they might not be that easy to implement. But Moody, anything in particular you would recommend to our audience? Kind of what are you seeing kind of across industries when you're seeing your clients or organizations that you're working with embedding resilience into the supply chain? Anything in particular that kind of that's really kind of grabbing your attention and thinking that's something worth looking at in the immediacy?
Yeah, I think you captured, we have the right points here. Like, we're being vigilant. We just spoke about how fast evolving and unpredictable environment we are in. So I think we have to keep our eyes on the ball. We have to optimize inventory strategies on an ongoing basis. We can't just do it once and assume that it's, these inventory levels and our thinking is going to hold for many months or many years. But if I can touch a little bit on the third point, which is collaborating with stakeholders and suppliers, I think a lot of companies have in the past tended to make inventory decisions for their business and somewhat in isolation. But I think companies which are thriving, companies which are doing very well, are companies which are building deeper transparency and collaboration with their supplier partners. So that and I think it goes back to some of the bullwhip effect that we talk about in supply chain. The challenges seem to get amplified as we get farther and farther from the point of consumption. So that is kind of what we see in many cases when we don't have the full transparency and visibility. So I think collaboration with the suppliers in terms of managing the inventory, in terms of sharing the actual production planning. So that, I think, is key to making some of these concepts come to reality. I think companies can only go so far if they are only trying to optimize inventory within their four walls, within their systems. So I think they have to look at it more holistically across that entire ecosystem with including their partners, including our functional stakeholders, but also treating suppliers as true partners versus that transactional relationship that many companies have had in the traditional procurement world.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for leading in there. Nick, let's take us on to the next section of the report. As we head now to look more at how we upgrade procurement capabilities, can you lead us through the findings from this perspective, please? We've still got you on mute, I think, Nick.
There we go. So yeah, we touched earlier on how procurement teams displayed impressive resilience during the pandemic, perhaps even an understatement. But I think we could probably agree that that sort of almost firefighting approach is not one that anyone would like to rely on or retain over a prolonged period, particularly when we're seeing these challenges in supply chains. So one side during 2022, this lesson perhaps learned from the pandemic is the importance of improving procurement's ability to, as a function, to operate optimally during times of disruption, because the risk is there's going to be a lot more of it in the months and years to come. So in this respect, both people and processes we've determined is key. One of these elements, of course, that has been mentioned throughout the year is the use of data in the function. Those who are on the call who attended WPC in May will probably recall that increasing, improving use of data was a theme frequently cited by speakers and attendees there. So through this year's poll, we wanted to gauge the extent to which data use in the function is being targeted and what proportion of respondents are planning to amplify it in 2023. 85% of respondents will expand their existing use of data. And there's the breakdown. So as you can see, the overwhelming majority are building on existing data use. We've got people who are already brought data into their day-to-day function and are building on that, and a much smaller percentage who are debuting it in the coming year. I think, Moody, we'd have to say, given the breadth of potential threats to supply chains and what we've seen happening, this is no bad thing, right? This increased use of data is going to give teams, or should give teams, those optimal levels of visibility that can help them maintain integrity of their operations. This extra pair or many extra pairs of eyes that allows the function to monitor where the problem areas might arise and what needs urgent attention.
Yeah, Nick, I think you're spot on. Again, this is very, very encouraging to have 85% of senior leaders recognizing, actioning deeper use of data and insights. And typically when we see like companies looking at data and drawing some advanced analytics out of it, what we see is like companies, I think of them as in kind of three buckets. Like bucket one is companies who are, making sure that they can use historical data appropriately. If the data is consistent, different business units in large global companies are saying the same things against the same data sources, same assumptions. So you can compare apple to apples, right? So that's key. It's no small feat for many companies, and that's the right thing to do some foundation building. So that's kind of one aspect of these companies. Now, second dimension is for companies who are a little advanced in their data journey, and they are saying that we got the historical stuff down, but all it is telling me is what happened in the past, and I'm making my future decisions based on past data, which is okay, but it's not great. And what we need to be doing and where we need to be headed is using more advanced analytics. That's where we kind of start to get into more predictive, more prescriptive thinking, and that should inform our decisions that are being made for the future. So I think we see that across the spectrum of different companies, there is an investment there. Companies who are somewhat in the initial stages of their journey, they're focusing on getting that consistency right, getting the data sources right, and all of that good stuff, getting that foundation building. And companies who have done that, they're now taking it to the next level and getting into that predictive, prescriptive areas, which is where the fun really begins. So yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Absolutely needed for procurement function to take the next big leap.
I guess one thing, of course, though, a worthy caveat, and some of the feedback we got on this is that data is great, but on its own, it's no silver bullet, right? You still need to put the people who can use it, drive it, shape it, utilize it, leverage it, right? That's the other thing. It's not a single element. You've got to pair it with the right personnel as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's where I think as we talk more about the skills and how the function itself is shaping up, I think that it does come to life, Nick. So that's a very valid point.
Sure. Okay. We can touch that again when we talk more maybe about talent. Another area we looked at was automation. Again, a popular theme. 53%, more than half of respondents said they're adding to existing automation processes, which it's points to this resilience, isn't it? That by bringing more automation into the function, there's almost a double benefit, right? One, of course, is improving efficiencies, levering data, but it's also helping support, I guess, for want of a better term, free up people to work in the function, right? That allows them to then, maybe set about the more creative, problem-solving tasks, allow them to look at the more intricate bits and pieces that they otherwise would be tied up with in knots were automation not there. Just looking at this graph here, I mean, one thing that surprised me a little bit was that a quarter of respondents said they're automating processes for that come as a surprise to you. I thought we might see a smaller figure than that than actually turned up.
Yeah, no, I think it is an interesting figure, Nick. I think a good observation from your side. I think if we took a step back and really think about procurement as a function on what do we stand for, there are various aspects of what we do that are truly strategic in nature, like that involve developing like deep category strategies, our ability to partner with business, our ability to distill down some macroeconomic factors, and then really translate it to what it means for our business. What decisions should we be making for where we buy some of the raw materials or services or whatever we need to buy, who we buy it from, and what that time horizon should look like. But at the same time, procurement is also marred with a lot of necessary but tactical activity that is needed to keep the house running and to be able to perform some of the call them fiduciary responsibilities, making sure there is not enough fraud, making sure there is compliance, things that need to be done so that, we are running the procurement in the right way. And at times it's kind of hard to kind of focus on what's truly strategic versus what can be done in sort of that rule-based kind of format, right? So what is that judgment-based kind of thinking versus rule-based thinking? Now, I think what it traditionally, you see a lot more automation in traditional shared services kind of functions, payables, receivables, where you have very clear rules. You can train an automation engine to kind of do the work. Bots can do the work themselves, very clear. I think now folks have started to wrap their head around procurement and saying that, well, not all of it is that strategic. In fact, there is a lot of noise in the system, and some of the more strategic, capable people are spending their time in tactical, transactional stuff. So it is imperative that as we try to do new things, that is another challenge, right? As a function, I don't think we will hear anywhere that procurement is going to get a lot more many headcounts and capacity in future. I don't think that's going to happen. But at the same time, the function is expected to do more and do more of strategic thinking to help the enterprise goals, to bring in some of these insights that we are talking about. So to do that, you have to free up capacity. And the best way to do it is start to pick up some of these automation areas. So I think there are two things. One is naturally there is more confidence that automation works. Naturally, there is a realization that part of procurement is truly rule-based and is ripe for automation. And now I think from a timing perspective, there is a bigger impetus to do it now because we have to do a lot of other stuff that we don't have resources for. And that's kind of what we are seeing in the data. So that's how I'm interpreting it. It is surprising that almost a quarter of respondents are doing it for the first time, but I'm glad that I think the function is moving towards a strategic direction, and a lot of companies are taking their leap of faith into automation as we move forward.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing as well, I mean, when we talk about people and talent as well, certainly something that we've heard from a few folks over the last year is procurement functions that are well automated, making use of data, for example, well run. In terms of as a career prospect for people wanting to enter procurement, they become a more attractive prospect. It's something that that kind of a procurement function certainly is no harm in trying to attract talent. Something that worth bearing in mind amid competition in what we see as a tight labour market still for professionals, right?
Absolutely. I think it's an exciting area to work with, a lot of cross-functional skill sets needed. And as we think about deeper partnership with the business, as we think about needing deeper skill sets, understanding of these automation AI tools, I think what we envision is a broader skill set within the procurement team. So you will see people from, as we were discussing earlier, some of those more specialists domain, stepping into procurement and lending a different kind of thinking to how procurement as a function evolves. And we are already seeing companies, deliberately, meaningfully investing in upskilling their procurement function, especially around digital transformation skills that are needed for future of procurement.
Great, and that's a very convenient segue, because our next slide is talking exactly about that, non-procurement specialists. So the amount of respondents saying they're bringing in specialists outside procurement roles, 60%. We'll just break that figure down on the next slide. There we go. So this is what we polled, and the breakdown there of who've brought them in or planning to bring them in. So that's where we get the 60. 41% brought in, and a further 19% planning to bring in. It was interesting actually what we got from respondents who said who they brought in. I mean, it talks of what you just mentioned there. Some of the examples that we were giving in people with backgrounds or specialism in sustainability, in IT, in sales, in finance, and supply chain related capabilities, among others. And this sort of dovetails, I think, with other stuff that we've seen through the year with other PL stuff that we've published in other reports. For example, other Tether World report published earlier this year, we had 90% of CPOs and CSCO respondents saying that non-traditional business issues are a bigger factor in decisions than they were, say, 3 years ago. The skill set required for procurement, and because this talks to, I guess, the more challenging environment, and therefore speaks to the need for resilience, is broadening. That demand for diverse skills, bringing people from other parts of the business, is increasing. Huh?
Yeah, well, that's a very good tie-in. I think if we needle this thread, traditionally procurement was there for saving money, cost savings, negotiations. That was kind of the traditional background for a lot of procurement professionals. But now, as the agenda evolves at a procurement leadership level, the desire for talent which knows more than just the procurement skill set is growing rapidly, because the agenda and objectives are evolving, and you need that broader thinking, you need that broader skill set to be able to partner effectively across your own function. So very prevalent, very relevant research. I think this really demonstrates how some of the large companies are making their choices for future of talent in procurement.
Great. Okay, thanks. Now, just before we move on to the next session, I just wanted to touch on one other data point we got from the survey. It comes back down to advanced demand planning capabilities. For company plan for demand, the current environment, I guess, it's no picnic. I mean, it's far more complex. The one that we saw prevail before the outbreak of the epidemic and everything that's happened and since. And obviously there has been an emphasis on just trying to get hold of supply to meet demand, particularly post-pandemic, opening up. Now we've got a scenario where many major economies are battling double-digit inflation. We don't know what that's going to do on economic growth, or we've got a hunch, and consumer demand. That outlook regarding supply-demand balance is complicated, probably undercooks it. You see from the survey there, we've got less than 10% of respondents that said that their advanced demand planning capabilities are sufficient. So, a lot of work to be done. That to get through this environment with this increased volatility, that upgrade of advanced demand planning capabilities is very much required, would you say? I mean, it's encouraging to see that a lot of people are doing it, but step. Sorry, that was a question to you, Mudit. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think you froze for a second. No, I think it's absolutely critical. Again, I think if you set the context very well, so inflation, double digits across many leading economies globally. We have many different factors that are playing here too. So again, some context by industry. So food inflation is especially high. If you think about, take a step back and look at the commodities, food commodities are really, really high compared to where we were. Now, at the same time, we are seeing some of the other industrial commodities cooling off already. So if you look at lumber as an example, lumber prices were off the roof. They were like 300% higher, but now they are back to pre-COVID levels and they have dropped good like 70, 80%. So they were like 500 odd at an index. It went all the way up to 1500. Now it's back to like 450 or something. Similar story playing out on iron ore, which is another sometimes good indicator for how industrial investments are being made. Very similar story there. It's back to like early 2020 pre-COVID levels. So it shot up by like 100, 150% back to where it was. So I think we are still seeing kind of a tale of the two worlds, very, very high inflation in certain areas, slight softening in some other areas. And we are going to continue to see this cycle of quantitative tightening and fairly high interest rates that we have not seen in the past. And as we try to forecast consumer demand, which kind of lends to like some of the B2B kind of demand forecasting here, right? For most companies, they are selling to a business. So it's a business to business demand forecasting that we are usually trying to solve for. But it all eventually ties back to that consumer demand and what's happening in that macroeconomic environment. So I think what companies are realizing is that for since 2008, we have had very accommodative policy from Federal Reserve and other central bankers. We have been growing as economies. There have been pretty non-disruptive for the most part, right? We haven't seen wars. We haven't seen like supply chains breaking apart. It all kind of changed during pandemic, and now what we are seeing from socio-political challenges with Russia and Europe, I think that's also kind of playing into some of these uncertainties. So now I think after like more than 10 years, 11, 12 years of the relative stability where demand forecasting was fairly straightforward. We had tools that could solve for that. Now we are entering a scenario where the tools that worked in those 12 years of relative stability are not the right tools to work in high volatility as we look forward. And that's why companies are making a very conscious decision to invest and strengthen those capabilities. And it's a good time to do it too, because you have a lot of strong AI-based tools, which are not just looking at historical data and trying to project it out. There is a lot of capability upgrades that have happened in the tools available in the market. And now there's a clear sense to invest in those as companies try to improve this capability going forward.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for your overviews on the second portion as we looked at upgrading procurement capabilities there. Before we move on to the third, again, just some key action points from the report there for our audience today to think about. Adopt a smart approach to process automation. We went into some depth around that with the team. Leverage the full breadth of data at procurement's disposal. Likewise, again, moved to wax lyrical about the importance of that one. And embrace fresh approaches to unearthing talent. We've just spent a good bit of time there. We had questions come in as well. Hopefully they've been answered for you all on the call today. Certainly around kind of one was talking about kind of the factors contributing to procurement transforming into a strategic function for a business. Then I think we very much touched on that through the different approaches to automation and data being a key enabler from both of our panelists. So we'll move on to the third section now. So I'm certainly conscious of time as well, to make sure we have enough time for any further questions from you all at the end of the webinar today. But Nick, we move on to the third and final part of the findings from the Compass report this year. That was his look at mapping the course to net zero, a topic that's pretty hot for all of our members and global community right now. COP27 is right around the corner. We've seen this to be a pretty huge challenge as a function if we're going to hit our sustainability goals. What are you seeing here?
Yeah, so for this year's Compass, we want to just sort of take a pause and have a look and see how folks are getting on. Obviously, like you just said, for procurement, emissions, getting on top of emissions, tracking emissions, particularly Scope 3, is becoming a huge challenge. You mentioned there COP, obviously. Corporate emissions are going to be subject to further discussion and scrutiny in Egypt this coming weekend. And we've had some reports in the run-up to COP suggesting that efforts to reduce emissions to limit global warming are falling short. For most businesses, as we all know, Scope 3 emissions represent the biggest challenge in reducing overall carbon footprint. I think our Building a Procurement Sustainability Programme report, 57% of an organisation's environmental impact comes from supply chain. Of course, we know we're all familiar with firms that have figures in the sort of the 80% or 9% range. Obviously, the biggest problem here is tracking and mapping the size of that footprint. We polled, if I just pull up here now, this is where we are in people who said that they were on track to meet their Scope 3 emissions. 23% of respondents said they're on track to meet their Scope 3 emissions, compared with 50% for Scopes 1 and 2. If we look at the wider data, this is entering 23 on track to meet Scope 1 and 2. I think what's interesting here is the breakdowns in each category. Scope 1 and 2, 55% say they are on track, 12 an affirmative no, and nearly a quarter saying they don't know. When we move down into Scope 3, 23.1% yes they are, 24% split, but the biggest group there is the don't knows. That's quite a large chunk of people that don't know, and I want to sound like Donald Rumsfeld here, but the known unknowns. What do you think the big obstacle is? The big obstacle is here.
Yeah, so I have to say, like I was pleasantly surprised by some of the Scope 1 and 2 numbers. Felt a little optimistic to me, and at least what we are seeing in the market is companies are meeting some of the commitments being made. So we have truly kind of switched from just doing lip service to taking some actual action, which is very encouraging. The right thing to do for our planet and for the sustainability efforts. And I think another elevated role for procurement, which we didn't see traditionally in the past, to make it all happen, to cross-collaborate. 1 and 2, from what we are seeing, is being done with a lot of manual efforts, what we call a lot of elbow grease, and somehow getting it done. We got it done, we got it across the finish line. I think there is still an opportunity to institutionalize for how companies design their targets, institutionalize the monitoring, tracking, governance of them, especially for very large global companies which have footprints across hundreds of countries, hundreds of different manufacturing facilities. This becomes complex. It's something that is still being sorted out. When we think about Scope 3 emissions, that gets into higher level of complexity. Now we have to work not just with the energy and premises that we have, but we are talking about extended supply chains. I think there is a lot of effort that is being put to ascertain what that really means, how to kind of put some boundaries around it, how do we ring fence the areas that we target, and then how do we, again, translate it into the impact that companies are able to create, and then show the results back to their key stakeholders and shareholders. So I think Scope 3 emissions, still some work to be done. I think a lot of creative solutions are being put forward, both from frameworks and concept standpoint, as well as some strong digital tools that, again, would help institutionalize some of this thinking over time. Because eventually companies are going to look at how much do we need to invest in terms of time, energy, and resources to continue to do it on an year-over-year basis. I think we are getting there, but from my side, from what I'm seeing, it's still work in progress at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes that the process around Scope 3, getting the picture, putting the jigsaw together, involves casting the net. Right. I mean, obviously, I'll just move on to our next slide here. I mean, we polled on what is the preferred approach to reducing supply chain emissions, and the biggest reply was that people prefer directly collaborating with suppliers. That's ahead of things like working, creating, and complying with cross-industry initiatives or industry-wide sector initiatives, for example. What was interesting is the combination of the above, mixing that, and it looks that in order to, because like you say, there is no easy sort of way of gathering one place where all this stuff turns up. It is very much going out and maybe doing a bit of almost detective work, I guess, right, to find out where it is, suppliers. As things stand, in the absence of sort of a homogenized, multi-jurisdictional, single sort of framework whereby all this stuff can get pulled, it's very much up to companies to go out and say, right, you've got to tell me, I need to lean on and work with and collaborate with the supply chain to extract that information.
Absolutely. And another observation, supplier collaboration was a key trend that we spoke earlier on in the resilience conversation, in the inventory conversation, in the demand planning and forecasting conversation. And now I think it's, again, a theme that's emerging in the emissions and decarbonization area as well. So companies are putting more and more emphasis on how they can collaborate with their supplier partners better. So it's not surprising. It is absolutely true. Companies are taking a more strategic view with their supplier partners to, again, solve a whole suite of agenda items, which some of us, we talked about here in the conversation today.
Yeah. And of course, it's not just working with suppliers to get an accurate picture of what the emissions are. You've got to get those emissions down, right? You've got to work with those. And for a lot of these firms on science-based targets, for example, they've got it, the top of the clock is ticking, the glide scope is there. They've got to get them on the same timetable. So very much a collaborative process, leaning in, working closely, lending a hand, very much the sort of approach we would say to meeting their ambitions.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. Right. Well, I mean, that's pretty much the own points. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, Nick. And some action points for the audience on the line today. The three there we wanted to highlight for everybody: capture that supply chain carbon data from a range of different sources, engage with suppliers by focusing on collaboration, not correction, and establish an ESG reporting framework that really does allow us to stay on track. Muda, before we kind of close out this particular section, you mentioned kind of the importance of collaboration there. Anything further that you would add, or that you've seen as best practice, kind of with working with different organisations, that you would recommend for our audience today?
Yeah, I think two big ones from my side, two key takeaways. I think first one is more focused on a governance model that encourages both parties to come together. I think we can say what we want, but at the end of the day, there is always a relationship that tends to be a bit of a zero-sum game, right? I mean, savings here is margin reduction on supplier side, end of the day. So I think we have to take that into account, but at the same time, elevate that thinking and creating a governance that drives closer conversations, drive more strategic discussions, and find opportunities for more win-win scenarios across many of these things that we talked about: inventory, decarbonization. These are very strategic topics that lend themselves to that kind of discussion, but we need to have a proper governance model that can help facilitate this conversation. The second aspect, the second key takeaway, is to have the digital tools, collaboration platforms that can cut across the buyers, companies, and the suppliers, because a lot of planning, supply chain activities tend to happen within companies, and just POs and invoices tend to be traded between suppliers and buyers. So there are a lot of good progress that has already been made in that digital front. But I think those digital tools are also crucial so that we are not relying on like Excel spreadsheets and emails and PowerPoints to track what is being discussed. There needs to be more live collaboration, especially with the volatility that we talked in detail in the conversation today. So those would be my key takeaways, but a very, very important pillar for this to work out.
Thank you both very much for the depth you've gone into to provide us with some of the findings in your report today. I think it's really great to give even just, well, you've given depth, but also the top level kind of strategy opportunities for all of our attendees on the call. The report, I say, is very much a downloadable option for those members, our members of Procurement Leaders. So please do head to the additional resources page to be able to find that link and download it for the full in-depth report, which is very much well worth a read. We've got a bit of time left, though, to answer some questions that have come in, and I'd like to say we have had questions in from the audience today. So now just we can go through a couple of these at a bit of speed. Nick, one for you. When we were looking at the talent piece, we had a question get around what are the most popular business areas and where most specialists are coming into procurement. Are there any in particular that are being highlighted more so than others? We often hear kind of data scientists, etc. Are there any any particular areas that were highlighted from the report findings?
Yeah, sustainability cropped up quite a lot. Sales was also another one that cropped up quite a lot. I mean, it was quite a diverse list of different specialisms. Operations and engineering was another very popular one. Supply chain resilience leaders crop up. In terms of from actually other areas of the business, we're seeing people saying bringing people in from sales and business development. Sales, again, coming up quite a lot. Finance, again, as well. So there's a broad range of disciplines, but mainly focused on the sort of the repeated ones were those ones I've just mentioned.
Thank you, Nick. Mudit, one for you here. From Mark Morrissey, do you think we're seeing a tipping point where procurement moves finally from that cost management to a focus on risk mitigation with suppliers or within supply chain?
Absolutely, 100%. Can't say it enough. I just to qualify that, I think there is going to be a pivot. There is going to be a move. But I do see companies continuing to have that cost optimization agenda. It's not just cost reduction anymore. It's the right cost that will be key focus. But that cost optimization isn't going away, and automation is key to freeing up some bandwidth to take up some more of this strategic agenda for procurement leaders.
Another one that's come in, I'll kind of merge two questions here together that are on a similar theme that we had from the audience that was very much around how we can be more proactive against future geopolitical events. One of the previous questions to add context to that we had in from one other attendee today was saying that a lot of what we, that part of our role was to obviously look at particular scenario planning and think about what might happen and what might come from volatility in markets. How did we not almost see that this was something that could potentially happen to us, given this is what we are often kind of charged with doing? Is there anything in particular that you'd say kind of really stands out as allowing us to be more proactive against future political events? Anything down the pipe that you might think, and they reference, for example, China and Taiwan as being something from a geopolitical standpoint that we may be able to scenario plan for now?
Great question. And as we think about like planning and scenario building. I think the best suggestion that I could give is like having more fact-based scenarios being laid out. I think that's where some of that predictive analytics kind of helps. We start to build out different scenarios of potentially how things could play out, what they mean in terms of inventory, savings, supply continuity, pricing, and that allows you to somewhat quantify risks, but at the same time, make some judgment calls on where would you want to invest. I don't think our job is to be absolutely 100% right in predicting future events. That's a losing proposition. Predicting future is a hard business, right? I mean, we are not in that business. We are in the business of making sure we can quantify different scenarios, maybe outline the impacts of those, and make some judgment calls on where we want to invest. That involves a little bit more statistics, a little bit more deeper thinking and analytics that we could use. And that helps as we kind of lay these out. As we think about next year, I think there is a lot at play. There is a lot of moving pieces. I think as procurement professionals, we just have to make sure we are doing our due diligence in keeping up with some of those emerging trends and translating back to what it means for our business.
Yeah, without a doubt. Nick, I mean, this might be something that is a very simple no. This wasn't touched upon, and then Mood, I'll be interested in both your opinions on this anyway. We've heard this kind of come up before, kind of in conversations with procurement leaders about procurement as a service, as a business model, and something that has featured across conversations that we've had certainly with our events previously. Was that something at all that came up as a viable transformation strategy in Compass this year, or not at all?
I mean, it's interesting. We did actually ask people, how much is procurement being brought into planning, more involved with, spending more time in the boardroom, as it were. And certainly, respondents said yes, we are being more involved in that conversation. We've spoken here at PL about procurement being the antenna of the organisation, given the fact that it has all these sort of connections with, all across the value chain, across the supply chain, picking up all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, I think, obviously it does perform this service, in terms of this functional service, but then there are other layers, in terms of information gathering, intelligence, what's happening, early detection. I think if as Mudit mentioned, with things like data and automation, AI and stuff, that I think obviously there is information that procurement has its hands on. It's a question then of leveraging that and working that out and then feeding that back into the business. Although, I mean, I would certainly get Moodit's view on that as well.
Yeah, no, spot on. I think it's procurement as a service, again, could have many different connotations. I think that concept is going to evolve. Some of it could be, like we discussed earlier, some of it could be very strategic aspects of how companies operate. We spoke to quite a few of those today: external insights, macroeconomic analysis, impacts of like commodities and how they trade, how companies should hedge. A lot of these are very strategic decisions, inventories, decarbonization. So these are all strategic aspects. And some companies might say that, procurement, you provide a service into our supply chain, into our operations, into our sustainability organization on how we could track and manage some of these programs. We are also seeing a similar phrase being used in terms of engaging external providers, where they are hired to drive some key metrics and results and bring some of these capabilities for the companies. So there is sometimes a buy versus build kind of conversation as well around that same phrase. So I think it is an important one to look at. Many companies are choosing, there is an internal conversation on what procurement does. And then within procurement, companies are making some judgment calls that now that we need all these variety of different skill sets to come together, data sciences, analytics, external insights, digital tools, do we build it all by ourselves, or do we get some of it as a service from a third-party provider, which is also kind of becoming more and more prominent as the environment becomes very dynamic.
Absolutely. We are, unfortunately, gents, very much at time today, or just into our last minute. So thank you both very, very much indeed for really leaning in Nick, for finding us the overview and the depth of the report with regard to Compass for this year and all of the data points and findings, and moved it for your thought leadership as ever from GEP. Much appreciated from both of you for spending the last hour with us and talking us through how we can best prepare ourselves for 2023 and some continued volatility certainly, but a lot of opportunity potentially as well to continue to progress the function. So much appreciated. Thank you to all of you for being online with us today, and to GEP in particular for their partnership with us on this report. Please do take the time to provide us your feedback and fill out the survey questionnaires after this. And also please do head to the additional resources part of the webinar to find the Compass report for those of you who are members of Procurement Leaders to be able to download the full report. Also head to Procurement Leaders for GEP's marketplace page, where you'll find some superb white papers and further reports on a number of the topics that we've spoken about here today as well. And do take out a look at the upcoming calendar of our webinars here at Procurement Leaders over the next remaining part of the year. But thanks again to my panel. Really looking forward to seeing everybody again on a future webinar, and we shall see everybody again soon. But thank you very much for today. All the best.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.